How are you guys doing today? It's been a long day with a lot of sessions. Hopefully, I do justice before we break. My name is Dharshan Shanthamurthy, and I lead a cybersecurity company called SISA. I've been an SISA for the last 18 years. I've been in this payment security from the time PCI Council was formed. So I'm super excited. This has been, I've been part of many community meetings, and it's great to be here in Hanoi. Over the next 20 minutes, I just want to give a flavor of why and what excites me to be part of this community is to really make a difference to the digital payment ecosystem. One of the things that fascinates me is the fact that we as a community have a big influence on the way societies actually shape up. We know cash is the enemy of inclusion, and security and the work that we do really strengthens the ecosystem, and in some sense, we help really improve society, develop, make a big contribution, and help societies grow, improve, and scale. So over the next 20 minutes, talk about the future, and that's shaping the future of payment security, and what better than talk about quantum. Quantum is here, and one of the key things that I would want to achieve at the end of my session is hopefully give you a flavor of what I think and why all of us as a community need to work to make sure that we are ready for the post-quantum world. So with that, let me get started off. First, just to understand the way digital payments are today, obviously it's growing phenomenally. There are different payment rails that are coming into picture. Every major government across the world are focusing on increasing digital payment acceptance and ecosystems. So you have multiple payment rails, and that's one of the reasons why it's expected to touch about $24.31 trillion with a compounded annual growth of about 15% every year by 2030. So that's a big number, and that's only going to grow exponentially. And of course, breaches continue to grow. We as an ecosystem are and have been doing a phenomenal job in making that the systems are secure, but the truth of the matter is, yes, breaches continue to grow, maybe outside the card ecosystem, but definitely is being a global forensic investigator, I can say that definitely the breaches have come down in the ecosystem because of the great work that we as a community have been doing, but there are associated losses that we have started seeing, including insider threats. Lloyd's, which is one of the largest marketplace in London, essentially speculates that cost of a potential breach, because of the high dependence that we have on the digital payment ecosystem, could be, if it were to have happened, it could be catastrophic and could cost the global economy as much as $3.5 trillion, which could set the entire world into a massive recession if it were to happen at any point in time. So that's the risk that is looming at large with quantum on our neck. And of course, just for some numbers there, healthcare industry has also started seeing, and financial industry has started seeing a lot of losses there. So just setting out the context that digital payments today are on one side growing exponentially, and then we have this great inherent risk. If something were to go wrong in the ecosystem, then we are up for something really catastrophic. And as a community, we can all come together and make a difference, and that's what I'm trying to accomplish today as I speak. Just on some of the data points that you may have gone through in the past, I'm sure some of you have heard that in the news. Google in 2019, October, claimed quantum supremacy with one of their quantum computers. It's called Sycamore. And for those of you who are new to quantum, quantum, of course, works differently from our classical computers. which has zeros and ones, but here you can have multiple states, what they call as qubits. And the Google launched this Sycamore processor in 2019, and claimed that they could do a mathematical function, a calculation, and do that within 200 seconds, what would take a classical computer 10,000 years. And that was when they said that that's the claim of quantum supremacy. And they did that, and of course, later IBM said that classical computers could then, of course, modify itself to do it in 2.5 days. But the fact is that they opened the can of worms, and that's using the Shor's algorithm, kind of demonstrated that it's really possible, and quantum supremacy is there, and something that we all need to wake up for. Subsequently, of course, IBM launched this Osprey supercomputer in 2021, which could, of course, Google did it at about 64, I think about 54 qubits. IBM did it with about 460 qubits, which is massive leap of computing, because obviously just increasing qubits does not really work because they need to be stable. And there is a concept of quantum entanglement and concepts of that. But it was good enough for them to demonstrate that the speed at which the growth is happening is phenomenal. From say 54 qubits to about 400 plus qubits. And then China released its, if I get the pronunciation right, something called Chaohong, which does 500 plus qubits of processing, which is just, it was a big milestone because it's crossed the 500 qubits. And we call it the Q day. The Q day is when quantum will be able to actually break our current cryptographic algorithms that exist, the RSA, the ECCs, the current algorithms that we have. And that quantum day, what they call, is expected to happen at around 4,000 qubits, with, of course, stable conditions. So it's not too far. We are at about 500 qubits, and 4,000 qubits is where it will actually break. And experts, of course, estimate that that would take about 9 to 10 years, from 2023, so it's around 2033. But at the end of the day, it's anyone's, fear that what happens if it gets done much earlier. And that's one of the reasons why the United Nations has proposed 2025 as the year for International Year for Quantum Science and Technology, just to increase the amount of awareness that quantum is here for us to take it very, very seriously. And the projected size of global quantum computing market by the end of the decade is about $50 billion. And there's a lot of research, a lot of countries. I was in Abu Dhabi just last week, and they had actually organized multiple countries to come from all over the world, from China, from US, from South Korea, and many organizations demonstrated their quantum computing roadmap. And there was one organization which had claimed, a startup, which claimed that they had got close to 1,000 qubits, which is massive progress. And they are saying that it's commercially going to be available. And many of the people in the quantum world who were naysayers, who were saying that it will take a lot more time, essentially said that this quantum, even if it breaks through, will not be available for general public. But now what's happening is that bulk of this quantum, even IBM released its quantum on clouds as a hosting service. So and many of them are available for research purposes, where you can use quantum computers for your research work, at, of course, 500 qubits kind of a work. So point that I'm trying to drive is the Q day is here, is going to come soon, and we need to prepare for that. And the time is of the essence here. And for those of you who love formulas and theorems, you can probably read up a theorem called by Dr. Michel Moscow, about how you need to calculate your roadmap for moving and post-quantum cryptography. It talks about the fact, it's a simple theorem which is x plus y should be greater than z, and x is the time that you need to keep your data secure, your time period, because depending on which industry you belong to, the time period in which you need to keep it secure. Y is the time that you need in order to move to a post-quantum cryptography should be greater. If it is greater than the time required for Q day, or where the Q day, then we have really a problem. And so the theorem essentially, in short, for all of us, says that we are actually nearing a period where we don't have too much time. We need to move pretty quick to post-quantum cryptography, and we'll talk about it as we move forward. But point that I'm trying to drive here is, from this slide, is the countdown for quantum for Q-Day has started. So what's the compliance challenge? Of course, we are a group of compliance people out here. So what does it mean? Generally, I gave some numbers for you, but what is this? Why is this called the quantum jump? Something which could take 300 trillion years could probably do it in 10 seconds. That's like the quantum world. Multiple states. Qubits just makes things a lot more possible. It is multiple states. Instead of just 0 and 1, you will have multiple states. You can have 4, 6, 8. And of course, there is a way to get that, this concept of quantum entanglement and for quantum physics with superpositioning. But point is that this is, this is game changing, and that's why it's called the quantum jump. And as we as security professionals, many of you who share the same, profile as what I do, when we started off, we all started off with the background of, and we assumed that data is protected in these algorithms were there. And these are fundamental to our cybersecurity approach. And so this becomes a challenge as we move forward. And so it's going to shake the very foundation of cybersecurity approaches. And the Shor's algorithm, which is the algorithm which challenges all our asymmetric encryption, basically the RSA, the elliptical curve cryptography are some things that are going to are no longer going to be good enough for our cryptography, and it's going to be broken. And it's already been demonstrated. So Shor's algorithms talks about it, and something that we need to be watched for. And Grover's algorithm essentially talks about the fact that our 3DS and AES encryption key length is going to get halved with quantum computing. So if we have a AES 128-bit encryption, it's going to be half as powerful with quantum computing. So it's going to become like a 64-bit encryption. So we all have to move and double down. So you essentially will have to move from 128 to 256, even to secure our symmetric cryptography, which is comparatively safer in quantum world compared to an asymmetric encryption. So why worry? I spoke about it. We are expected to hit the Q day, anytime in 2030. It's anyone's guess at this point in time. Hopefully our quantum researchers are going slow, but if they go fast, like the way it is happening now, with so much of investments being done in quantum world, it might be even earlier. So we are already, we have to take Michel's Moscow's theorem pretty seriously and start working towards it. And one of the key things that people essentially said that, hey, the encryption is still not broken, but the concept of harvest now and decrypt later strategy is being employed by many state actors as well as intruders at this point in time. So you could still harvest all the data, collect all the data, and especially if you are a government agency, bulk of this data can be subjected to an attack at a later point in time. So we have to be conscious of the fact that even if it is quantum computing is still not live today, we have the risk of actually exposing data a few years later. And this becomes extremely relevant. And of course, in the payments world, we have a little bit more comfort because of the fact that we have a shelf life for bulk of this data, and after a point in time, it becomes irrelevant. But it may not be the case for government information, national security kind of data. And time is running out for critical industries. I spoke about it. And challenge, of course, is cryptographic migration is it's going to be a little compute intensive. We need to prepare for that. It is not the question of if it's going to happen, it's when it's going to happen. So the migration is not going to be easy. We all know, especially people in the fraternity know how hard it is to, we've struggled to even migrate keys. And roughly it takes about, the industry took about 20 years to even migrate many of the point of sale terminals when you had to do key changes and key upgrades at the point of sale terminals or at the ATMs and so on and so forth, because the compute is going to be a challenge. And 62% of the companies actually lacked visibility on how to make the quantum risk management at this point in time. So just giving you some statistics. And the end goal for me is to actually see my outcome would be achieved if all of us realize that we need to start working on quantum and having a post-quantum cryptography plan starting today. So the new algorithms, the good news is that NIST just released, 2024, released the PQC, the post-quantum algorithms, so they've been pretty quick. There's enough guidance out there. The ML Chem, which is the key encapsulation method, which is out. You can start using that. There is also the digital signature algorithm, MLDSA, which got released. And then there is also the SHA algorithms, which have also got released. So pretty clear as to what we need to do on the post-quantum world. In terms of the impact that it has on the payment security, the key scenarios that we have is, of course, all of us know that in chip and pin, we have, especially when it comes to offline authentication, we use RSA, which is obviously needs migration. The EMV core, I'm sure, is working to make those algorithms a lot more PQC. There is pin translation, of course, still works on symmetric, so still that's fine, but we still need to make the change happen and increase the key length. And of course, you've got digital signatures definitely would need to be changed because it's no longer good enough for in the post-quantum world. So the next chapter in payment evolution is, of course, the fact that all of us have to start the migration. At least it was the earlier phase before this, a couple of months ago, people were saying that, hey, you could migrate from RSA to ECC and then have an intermediary hop and then migrate to post-quantum cryptography. But I don't think that's feasible any longer. We would need to actually have a strategy to start now. And what would be recommended is a hybrid approach, is to have our classical computing, the ones which can withstand classical computing, those encryption algorithms with a combination of PQC, so that at the end of the day, we are resilient to the future. So what would we recommend in the end? For me to conclude, ensuring compliance in the post-quantum era, start with having a post-quantum compliance strategy. Start today. It is a no-brainer that we need to have a crypto-agile strategy. And what does a crypto-agility essentially mean? An ability to move to PQC environment at any point in time. So any new application, new systems that you are developing, make sure that they are crypto-agile. Have a transition plan. Build strategic relationships with industry bodies. I'm sure PCI standards, community standards council would come out with some guidance note very soon, considering that NIST just released. Prepare your infrastructure. You would need an infrastructure upgrade. Start having those conversations with your partners, your vendors. I'm sure they're going to come out with something that is aligned with the NIST guidelines. And start the migration. Start planning for the migration with a phased approach so that we are not caught by surprise if at all there is a Q day which comes faster than what we think. So in all, keynote, if I were to conclude my presentation, is to have cryptographic agility. if all of us can take that one word back home, I think my presentation would have achieved its outcome, is basically assess. Believe me, in most organizations, the cryptographic algorithms that are the inventory, many organizations lack the inventory. So I think first and foremost, if you can have that inventory, that's going to be a big step forward. Assessing where you are with respect to your quantum preparedness. Start with the ones which you are most vulnerable, especially things like the RSA or the applications which you are going to start developing. Especially imagine a connected world where you're releasing a vehicle today and that's going to go live in 2030, and then that vehicle is going to be there till 2040. So we are already late in many cases to actually have a rollout. So we need to hurry up in terms of making sure that those rollouts happen much faster than which we have not thought through, if at all we have not thought through. And of course, map out the long life sensitive data which needs to remain secure. So you need to have a crypto agility strategy around that space. So just to summarize, quantum world is there around the corner for us. We need to prepare for it. And post-quantum cryptography is not something that we all read and we can afford to ignore at this point in time, because everything that we do from a protection standpoint, whatever we spoke or we speak from every compliance standard is based on cryptography. And that needs necessary attention as a community. And I'm very confident that this team of payment security professionals will work together like the way we have done in the past decades to make sure that the digital payment ecosystem is secure and the growth of digital payments to help people in the economies continue to happen. With that, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being here.